I feel like I should have wore a jersey too, so we could go full bro. Like, this needs to be ultra bro. We could have matched.
No, I'm here to represent the bro delegate.
We need it.
Yeah.
There's a major deficit on the progressive side right now in that arena.
There's been a lot of talk about the need for progressive bro culture in the Manosphere. But don't worry, that's not the new focus of the show. But it is how we're kicking off season 2 of Shifting Terrain. In this season, we explore the forces both capturing and dividing the working class, which includes the alarming reach of Christian nationalism, if unions are actually the way to build power, and whether or not immigrants are taking your job. I'm your host, Rachel Rybaczuk, a working class sociologist who spent a long time thinking about class and race. As the child of an immigrant growing up working poor in a city, these factors were part of how we made sense of the world. And so I'm back to have more conversations with experts and everyday people to amplify the cultural, political, and economic issues of America's working class today. In this episode, we're talking about the media. Again. It's fair to say left-leaning media abandoned working class people a long time ago. The same can be said about the Democratic Party. This left a void filled by right-leaning influencers, politicians, and podcast empires. But a noticeable counterforce has emerged in recent months. To understand the battle going on for the eyes and ears of many working class men, we're talking with Colin Davis, a weightlifting progressive social media star, and Reese Peck, a college professor from season 1 who studies Fox News and political podcasts. We'll also hear from Joan Williams, a public intellectual who explains the conditions that made plain-talking political commentators so powerful. First, let's hear an Instagram clip from Colin, whose impressive deadlifts and political hot takes are resonating with tens of thousands of people.
Get off of your fucking high horse and go help people. These people are poor, they are disenfranchised, and they need help. They don't need some snarky liberal sitting on their high horse going, oh, well, you voted for the evil man, so your house should get washed away. This is why there's more division. When we want class solidarity, it's going to mean taking these people back from the fascists and showing them the right way.
So you got my attention for a number of reasons on social media, and it's a combination of how you look. You're like this built white guy with blonde hair, brown hair, like you're conventionally very handsome. You're talking about current events, politics from a progressive angle, while also talking about lifting weights or like showing yourself like in the gym. You could just as easily be talking about sports and supplements exclusively, which is a whole brand, right? So How do you describe what you're about and your brand if you have one?
I mean, like, first and foremost, fitness content. I'm not setting out to be a political voice or political influencer. I love the gym and I love strength training and I love the culture so much. And I just got really sick of seeing it overrun by guys that think they should have political opinions and having them all be like fascist opinions, essentially. And so I was like, well, if they're going to give their opinion, I might as well give my opinion too, and at least show that like there's some of us out here that aren't these guys. Most of the guys that are super well adjusted and have progressive views just aren't on the internet because they're like have other shit going on and they don't need to like go on the internet and get likes for their abs. And so all of the guys, quote unquote, representing the gym online are the loudest minority. And so I was like, well, there's got to be some pushback on this on the internet so that people get an idea that this is not everyone that lifts weights.
So another reason that I noticed you is because of a post you made about class consciousness, which is a very specific way of talking about being aware of class. What gave you class consciousness?
Yeah, I think growing up not being mega rich, seeing families that were mega rich, that's the first time I think most people is like you're 8 and you see some kid get a toy in the store that you want and you're like, well, why can't I have that toy? And I think that for me was kind of the kickstart of like, oh, like this money thing has a lot of weight. And then as I grew up, I left high school and worked like a blue collar job, and I was working in really expensive houses for like $15 an hour, putting their cabinets in, and seeing people spend 80 grand on kitchen cabinets and $150,000 on like a wine cellar. I was like, oh, what the? There's a whole level of wealth that I cannot comprehend. And then I have always been pretty progressive and pretty left leaning. And so, like, all of the issues tie together. This is all class related. Every social problem is also a class problem. Every class problem is also a social problem.
And how do you define class? What criteria are you using to determine what it is for yourself or somebody else?
I mean, I think personally, it's like a owner versus worker. And the owning class is the people that own the factory that you work in, or like own the car that you drive that you pay a payment on every month. And then there's the rest of us who are exchanging time for money or labor for money. That's the easiest split that I see is, do you make your money through labor and through exchanging your time, or do you make your money through just owning things and those things making you money all the time?
Well, what about like a software engineer who's making $300,000 a year versus you installing cabinets in someone's house for $15 an hour?
I mean, it's hard to be the poorer person there and be like, we're in the same class, but for the sake of getting people to have class consciousness, like, we are the same class. And then I think for the tech guy, he doesn't want to be associated with me as the cabinet guy. He's like, well, I'm above them. And that's where we get this like petite bourgeoisie, or like we get this middle class, upper middle class separation. And it's like, none of us own the factory. You know what I mean? Like, there's one guy that really is the problem. The rest of us are all fighting over the crumbs.
The way you're talking about it, like you've been saying the petite bourgeoisie, where did you get that language? Because you told me you didn't go to college.
No,
right?
I didn't.
So you didn't go to college. You graduated high school?
Yeah.
So you graduated high school. And something that's just like a personal bone I'm picking is how much the mainstream and rich people who dominate it talk about working class people like we're all stupid. And some people say that getting a college degree is the defining characteristic of whether or not you're working class. And that implies that you're dumb. And I understand there's some of it is like exposure to ideas, but ideas don't just live in universities. And you're an example of this. You're throwing down some Marxist theory, basically. So like,
I mean, the library is free.
do you go to the library and you read Marx or what?
Yeah, I fucking love the library. But to have discussions about theory and talk about class, if you're going to talk about class, you have to talk to everyone in all of the classes. And there's idiots that are billionaires and there's geniuses that are homeless. You know, I think this idea of intelligence being tied to a degree has been, I mean, it was something I struggled with for a long time, not having a degree. It was a massive insecurity of mine throughout like my teenage years and through like my very early 20s. I was like, damn, like, am I stupid? And then I met people that graduated and have degrees, and I was like, no, I'm definitely smarter than you. So this whole degree thing doesn't really hold weight.
That's amazing. Our next guest is still a pretty smart guy, even though he both went to college and teaches at the College of Staten Island. Last season, we talked with Rybaczuk about how traditional liberal media failed working class people. Now we have him in conversation with Colin, who might just be part of the solution to reconnect folks across class and political divides. Okay, so what do you each see from your position in the political media as a person who studies it and someone making it?
I can't really speak to mainstream media. I don't have cable, and I've never had cable. And I'm not like reading the Times. I'm on social media and then like on Patreon for some independent journalists that I support. But yeah, I think it's just the same cannibalistic media cycle that we've had since the early 2000s.
You know, I think we've lived, now we're almost 3 decades into a hyper partisan, polarized American media culture, right? It's like, and it's only ratcheted it up. It only gets worse and worse. The cable first was this kind of watershed moment that created these niche television markets. And then Fox News, of course, innovated Like, we're just going to be a conservative partisan show. And that's our marketing pitch, is to be partisan and conservative. MSNBC follows, there's a domino effect. But then once we get to the internet and the algorithms, it's like that on steroids, right? It took what was already happening in cable and just turned it up a notch. And so younger people have basically existed in this, what I would say, pretty toxic, hyper political media environment. And then the response to that is to check out. The response to that is to avoid news and to avoid political media. And that's devastating as well, right? That has its problem, that level of apathy or alienation. And then what happens is, they always say, I'm not into politics. Well, politics is into you. It's going to seep into your fitness commentary. It's going to seep into your comedy. It's going to seep into your music. Like, you can't get away from politics because it's going to come at you one way or the other. It's just coming through non-political media or seemingly non-political media.
But to that point, seemingly people are obsessed with Joe Rogan, right? It's like, if you don't listen to him, you're hearing people talk about him in some way. Though I think there's plenty of people who don't know who he is at the same time. On Instagram, the call her daddy social media clip.
I need you to tell me something. Who the f*** is Joe Rogan? Because I saw something I saw a TikTok using his name today, and I was like, what is that? And that was not the first time I'd heard this name, but I'm not sure who that is.
But he's credited by some as having swung a historic election. And so what does Joe Rogan actually represent? What is he offering that is people are so preoccupied with?
As a Joe Rogan listener, I think...
You listen to Joe Rogan?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I think he's just a kind of relatable guy that asks questions normal people can understand. Like, he can bring on an astrophysicist and he's not like asking him questions at his level of education. He's asking him questions from my level of education. And so when he's like, hey, what's astrophysics? And the guy explains it, you're like, oh, cool. I think initially it was just kind of a gateway to getting information in a way that more dudes could understand. It's just kind of like having a conversation instead of like, oh, we're going to like listen to a lecture. He's getting talked about a lot as like, he swung the election and like, we need a Joe Rogan of the left. And like, I say this treading lightly, not political. He has a super wide variety of people on and like lets all of them talk and just ends up having more right-wing people on because right-wing people are chasing fame and money and want that platform versus more left-wing people are generally like doing real activism and like are too busy to go on some podcast. He's like on record. He was like, yeah, like I wanted Kamala to come on the podcast. Her team said no. So I had Trump on because his team said yes. So the problem wasn't that Joe Rogan platformed one person and not the other. The problem was the Democrats were too chicken shit to go talk to him because they didn't have a leg to stand on when he was asking them questions. He wasn't going to conform to a script and he wasn't going to like give them softballs. And so the Democratic establishment was like, no, you can't talk to our candidate, that's on the Democrats, not on Joe Rogan.
Reese, what do you have to say?
I think that's really insightful. I mean, I was a Joe Rogan fan. I used to listen to Rogan in his initial kind of ascendancy, which was in the 2015, 2016 era. And I would say I'd agree with Colin, like back then, especially, what was so refreshing about Rogan was he seemed to transcend this partisan back and forth. You know, Rogan's main thing is part of his appeal is masculinity. It's what we're talking about right now, right? That he was a bro. And I think that there's a knee-jerk reaction by some on the left to when they see anything bro-y, they say that's conservative, right? So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? As soon as you label some guy that's a bro conservative, then you critique him for that, and then he reacts, and then he's like, maybe I am right-wing. Maybe to be a bro means I should be right-wing. And I think what happened with Rogan was over time, there's this term called audience capture, and maybe we don't need to get into it, but YouTubers talk about it all the time, where as his audience became more and more right-wing, it affects the host. The host internalizes what clicks, what works, what gets comments. And so I think over time, you see his political evolution. What started as like, I'm sick of social justice warriors, eventually turned into like, I'm endorsing Donald Trump. But, you know, as Ryan Grimm said, we had a Joe Rogan of the left. It was Joe Rogan because he endorsed Bernie Sanders in 2016. He endorsed Bernie in 2020. But I think overall, Colin's right that he still has that charming part of his brand, which is to appear to transcend partisan, knee-jerk partisanship, right? To appear to be more relatable or more independent in his thinking and more curious. But I do think if you code it and you analyze it in depth, you see there's more right-wing guests. You see kind of right-wing talking points seep in to his analysis of society.
Yeah. And I think like with a lot of online media, COVID was a massive shift for his show. And there's a great, he had Bill Burr on, and he was like, said something about the vaccine, and Bill Burr looks at him, he's like, dude, I'm not going to do this with you. We're both fucking comedians. Like, neither of us have a degree, neither of us are doctors. Why are we talking like we're experts? And I think that shift for him from like being a guy that's just like asking questions to being a guy that's like, no, I know things, was where I kind of checked out, because I was like, no, you're a comedian fighter. Stay in your lane, ask smart people questions. Don't try to be a smart person. Pot calling the kettle. Like, I'm a personal trainer on a political podcast, but like we end up with this like not educated conversations, and it just waters all the way down until you're like, yeah, actually I should never pay taxes. That's dumb.
I think there's a balance that can be struck between having real experts on and then having that everyman host ask those questions. I mean, us professors would die to speak to the public in that particular way, not just in peer-reviewed articles. To have someone that could translate and make that bridge from our expert knowledge to everyday people and the way they think and talk, that's excellent. But the question is who's actually the expert that you're bringing on? Are they making productive arguments that are based in fact, or very harmful arguments about vaccines, about elections, about climate change? I guess that's where you get in danger, where when you just have the comedian running the show that's not really thinking deeply about his editorial process and guest selection, is he can amplify like misinformation on a scale that no other news outlet really can. I mean, his audience dwarfs anything that comes close to Rogan. It's like 12 million or 20 million, I think, an episode, where like you take TED Talks or CBS or something like that. It's like 5 million on YouTube. So I guess that's my issue with him.
I want to go back to something you said, Reese, about the bro being tagged as Republican. And I think the bro is also tagged as working class.
For sure.
So can both of you speak to that? Like this kind of convergence of masculinity, a certain type of masculinity with working classness, and also then how that's coded as Republican.
Yeah, I mean, again, to insert theory and jargon, there's a sociologist, Pierre Bourdieu, and he talks about when he's studying the French working class, he said, in fact, that your body type is one of the most strong signifiers of your class. Do you have big fingers? My dad has huge fingers because he's an electrician, right? Do you work with your hands, manual work? It creates a certain kind of body. In white collar professions also leads to certain kind of body types. There's stereotypes of intellectual ability that we have, whether we know it or not, that's based in that guy's a meathead. He must be, not smart. And then also like sports, like my dad is obsessed with sports. Working class people take a lot of pride in athletic achievements because in some ways that's the only dignity that they're given in life. Like they're getting in shitty jobs. They're not respected, but they remember what it was like to have that camaraderie and that status in athletic achievement. My dad never talks about my PhD. He always talks about that I was a state champion wrestler. I'm like, I've done all these things, Dad. But he's like, no, it's the wrestling that matters.
Sport culture is a massive part of it. And I think is a massive part of why a lot of bros end up being quasi right wing. You win a couple games, you get some glory. It's like, rah, rah, rah. And you get this idea that like the harder I work and the more that I do, the more successful I will be, which has been co-opted by the right as like this entrepreneurial spirit and like this side hustle culture of just get another job, dude. Just start drop shipping t-shirts, bro. And I think it comes out of competition culture. And I think competition culture also breeds hatred and like domination culture of like, I need to go beat somebody else so that I can have something. Like if I'm going to eat, somebody else has to starve. And that's just how it is. And I think that's the viewpoint that so many guys are coming from, is it's like, I'm not evil, I'm just winning. Like, yeah, I think a lot of guys through the early teens and being a teenager in that time, and like heavy language policing and heavy PC culture with none of the class benefits, they were kind of like, dude, fuck this. I can't say these things, and also I can't afford a house. What do you mean? I'm going to be nice to people, but then I'm going to be homeless too? You can't have social progress without class progress. And so I think this perceived push of wokeness without any class benefit or like material improvement on their life caused so many guys to just check out and be like, well, all of this is stupid. I'm just going to choose the people that are actually going to do something.
So that's a good segue into thinking about something people have been talking about. It's happening in recent days. There has been a pivot in some highly visible media. I'm thinking specifically about Gavin Newsom's social media campaign that's mimicking Trump's social media style. MSNBC is rebranding as MS Now. And I'm curious what y'all's take is on this.
In general, I think there's a scrambling from Democratic media to be like, oh God, like how do we get this demographic back? And their answer is, well, move farther to the right. What if we just become more center? Then they'll come to us. Instead of trying to pander to the 20 people that are center right and voting Trump because they're like, well, maybe he's a little bit better on some economic policies. Like, move to the left a little bit more and start promising people universal health care and housing and food, and run on like real, actual socialist platforms. And you will convince way more of the working class with that than you will by trying to be like, oh, like, look, we're the same people, but better.
But I will say there is an aesthetic element. For a while, the left has thought if you just offer people good bread and butter policies and deliver on those, that you can defeat the right's white working class identity politics, because that's all they're giving people is white working class identity politics. I think, whether we want to admit it or not, when we interface with someone, we look at their body type, we look at their image, we look at their aesthetic, a messenger, right? But then as we get to know them, we move into what are their morals. Then we get to know what are their policy positions, right? So I do think there is a role for cultural style, and particularly like a progressive masculine style. But it'll be for nothing. It'll be completely ineffective if it's not married to a real social democratic, economic populist like platform. But right now you just see them being like, put Pete Buttigieg on a podcast and have him swear and grow a beard. It's so superficial. Like, they kind of got the memo that they can't talk like robots. So I think we're like in a very superficial moment where the Democrats have learned something, but it's always like the most one-dimensional kind of analysis of it. And this is where the right has an advantage against the left, is that the right's boogeyman, class enemy, is professors like me. It's the cultural elite. And there's really no cost to go after cultural elites, but there's a cost to go after corporate power and corporate elites. You lose donations, you don't get support, but the left's done it before. The left did it in the 1930s, the New Deal coalition. They were both good at popular culture, and they actually really substantially went after monopoly corporate power. Right. And they changed the economic system. And that's why the left dominated ideologically for decades after FDR, right? Not till we get to Reagan, really. The right had to live in the world the left created in the 30s. But I think it's an and/or. It's media strategy, it's understanding popular culture, but it has to be paired with a true populist economic program.
The Republicans have been very successful in winning elections, and I don't hear their message based on economic populism necessarily. At least leading up to the presidential election, it was a lot about the culture war. It was a lot about wokeness, trans people, immigrants, and what they're doing now in practice is also targeting those groups of people. So how do you square that? If the left needs to bring an economic populist message and then they'll do better. But the Republicans haven't been doing that, and they cleaned up.
That message resonated with people because they are experiencing the effects of a growing wage divide, and like their quality of life is actively declining all the time. And they're angry, and they're like, oh my God, like something is happening, but they haven't connected the dots of class and like capitalism. They're running on cultural issues, but I think people are relating to those cultural issues because their economic life is in shambles. And that's a much easier option when the option is like dismantle the entire capitalist system and redraw the government, or be mad at immigrants. And so it's a much easier like thing to point at. You don't need as much language to explain it.
I think that's right. But I would kind of push back a little bit, Rachel. There was a study done of Trump's campaign speeches in 2017. There was two words that were mentioned the most: immigrant and then worker. Trump mentioned worker more than any other candidate. And, it's hard for kind of lefties to understand what are the kind of economic elements of Trump. But I think there's something about the businessman populism that works, that specifically resonates with working class knowledge and common sense. Not the Mitt Romney, who is a corporate raider, finance guy, but a real estate guy that does construction, right? And that businessman has a supply and demand, common sense economic perspective that I identify with more than the policy wonks and the hyper educated liberals.
Yeah, I mean, I actually made a point to listen to entire speeches that Trump gave instead of just sound bites on the news. And there was a lot of consistency around talking about how he was going to help workers or help the economy. Some of these conversations, even the ones that I have, can represent the working class as one monolithic mass, that everybody is hurting in the same way and wanting the same things. And Trump somehow delivered the right message for that group. But there's so much variation in the working class. I think sometimes even reflecting on what we've been talking about, it still assumes the working class as white men who are building things, as opposed to a Black trans woman who's waiting tables in St. Louis, or a Latina woman in Denver, doing childcare and like has a daycare. Where are those people in this analysis?
Yeah, I mean, I think like all of those people care about how much their rent is. You know what I mean? All of those people need a house. All of those people need to eat. And all of those people go to the doctor. The answer isn't to go like, oh, Trump is evil and he's ruining this thing. It's like, even our progressive presidents haven't been progressive. And so it's just been like a sliding scale to Trump. And so I think addressing the problem of Trump is a little too narrow. A thing he does really well is he's not going like, oh, the Democrats are evil, but he's going like the Democratic professors and the Democratic teachers and the Democratic cultural people are evil. And so when we start going, oh, yeah, like the Republican oil baron that owns your car and the Republican owner of Walmart who's causing your groceries to go up, right? Again, going after these corporate interests, like everyone that I've talked to, no matter their background about politics, we end up agreeing, yeah, we should probably go down to the CEO of Walmart's house together.
To protest.
To protest. But yeah, I think viewing them as a monolith is implying that we're looking at identity politics to win this and to like change the messaging. And it needs to be economic policies, and it needs to be class focused, like real world populist policies that we're talking about, instead of worrying about like, oh, well, how are we going to talk to a white man and a Black woman? It's like, yeah, again, they both got to eat, talk to them about food. I've never really had a conversation that ended without finding some kind of common ground, right? Without at least agreeing that we both hate pharmaceutical billionaires. Everyone agrees on that. And the messaging I think that resonates with these guys most is just letting them talk. They start to say something really stupid, and I have the initial reaction to like cut it off and correct and be like, no, you're an idiot. But let them get the point out, and then you just kind of like prod it. They'll be like, well, groceries are so expensive because like whatever, Biden. And you're like, really? Why is that? And they're like, well, Trump said it. And you're like, well, where do you get that information? And they're like, well, it doesn't matter. And you're like, but it does. You're a smart guy. Like, you should care. And they're like, oh, yeah, like I should care. And then they start to like look at it for themselves. And a week or two later, they come in, they're like, dude, did you know that it wasn't even his policies that did that? And I'm like, really? No way. And you found that out? It's like almost like gentle parenting them into progressive policies, because they don't want to get bullied. They don't want to get talked down to, and they don't want to feel dumb. You know what I mean? And then they need to feel like they figured it out on their own, and like they came to this conclusion, and that it's right, and that someone didn't put them in that box. And I think that's where the left is kind of missing, is just letting these guys figure it out and be kind of dumb and like ask crude questions. I spent a lot of time as a teenager working as like a translator for like the GSA at my high school, the Gay Straight Alliance. And so my kind of role was to like go do outreach with parents and be like, hey, this is what you do when your kid comes out. And the reaction I got from a lot of Southern dads when the president of the club was like blue-haired lesbian, very queer looking, and then I show up, the captain of the wrestling team, in like a t-shirt and gym shorts, and I kind of sit down with the dad and I'm like, look, dude, what are your questions? And he takes this sigh of relief and he's like, oh my God, like I just don't know what's happening. I don't know anything. And they yell at me every time I ask a question, because he's asking crude questions with the wrong language. But like the intention isn't for him to be transphobic, he's just confused. And so I think that experience gave me a lot of helpful knowledge to go have these conversations with guys that are just kind of misled and curious, but don't want to feel attacked for asking the wrong question.
Well, thank you for your service. I appreciate it. To Reese's point about style, it's like you have a particular style, right?
Yeah.
That like puts someone at ease who is also lifting weights at the gym, for whom that's their kind of, it's like a place of comfort. You get to connect with people in a particular way.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm not unaware of that fact, that because of the way I look and present, like these guys listen to me, and it's kind of like my responsibility, because they're only going to listen to me.
Yeah.
You know, they're only going to listen to another straight looking white guy that's like jacked. And so I'm like, well,
but it's the combo. It's
yeah.
that they look at you and you look like the way you are. But I think the key point that you made that's so important is that listening, letting them air out what they think, is a sign of respect. Just to listen and not correct initially is a sign. It's its own expression of respect in a way, if you listen to people. And so I think it's the combination of having an empathetic, like curious learning posture as the political communicator, and then looking a particular way, right? Those like a 1-2 punch of disarmament. So anyways, I just so many good points, Colin.
Thank you so much, Colin. That was Colin Davis. Check him out on socials. We'll include his accounts in the show notes. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Reese Peck, Associate Professor of Communication at the College of Staten Island, and overall great guy. Thanks for coming on Shifting Terrain.
Thank you, Rachel.
However you feel about this approach, there's clearly a need for more conversations across the political divide, because it's not simply a difference of inconsequential opinion. These fractures are related to fundamental needs for belonging, respect, and connection, combined with a lot of fear about meeting basic needs in a job market that favors finance and tech. But it's not only about having more conversations with your neighbor or the guy at the gym. There have been decades of policy failures for everyday people from both sides of the political aisle that set the stage for class division and polarization. Joan Williams, founding director of the Equality Action Center at UC Law San Francisco, has been at the forefront of this issue for years. In 2017, she released the book, White Working Class: Overcoming Class Cluelessness in America. It was so popular that Joe Biden was seen carrying a dog-eared copy of the book during his 2020 presidential campaign. Joan has a new book, Outclassed: How the Left Lost the Working Class and How to Win Them Back. Yeah, it's noteworthy to me that you're somebody who's spoken both or write and produce in what are considered liberal media outlets, academic contexts, and Fox News.
Yeah, I had a great time on Fox News.
What happened after that? What was the response from anyone, but in particular Fox News listeners, in terms of bridging across groups? Did something come of that pushed you outside of more of that like left liberal sphere?
No, I was just talking to anyone who would talk to me. And Fox News invited me on. I think it was a guy named Steve Hilton. who was a populist. And I got on. I said, I'm a San Francisco liberal. I'm not going to make any pretense about that. And I believe the working class of this country has really gotten screwed.
I definitely agree with that, including being sold a story that college was a guaranteed path to the middle class, but that's not the case.
Well, I think one of the paths forward for Democrats is to understand that income inequality has gotten so bad that not even people with college degrees are guaranteed a stable middle class life. But I think the focus on the sort of college for all ideal, which arose in the 70s and 80s, it was based on some kind of hard economic facts. Wages increased 83% for college grads after 1989, but hardly at all for non-college grads. So people just looked at that and said the path to a stable middle-class life is to get a college degree. Now, we need college classes, but we also need bridges, and we also need toilets that work, and we also need somebody to bring our food when we're sitting in a restaurant. These are important jobs that we actually need, and the wages for these jobs had been artificially depressed. I mean, wages would be 43% higher if workers had the share of productivity they had after World War II. That's a wage problem. That's not a college problem. And so the path forward for Democrats is, again, to see that inequality has gotten so bad. Democrats lost the working class over this issue because people just saw the American dream wither for them. I mean, over 90% of Americans used to do better than their parents, but now you just got about an even shot. So we already lost the working class, but now in the 2024 election, we also lost a lot of the young people. And I think that's because Trump focused on economics and the Democrats did not. And even young college grads, they can't get out of gig work in their 20s, in their 30s. They can't afford a house or childcare. So that reflects what you're saying, that inequality has gotten so bad that dream that people have not to be rich, but to have a stable middle-class life. That's the American dream.
There's a longstanding association between the Democratic Party and the working class. And obviously in the presidential election of 2024, more people realized what a lot of people have been saying for a while, is that the Democratic Party is not the party of the working class, and maybe they're taking that for granted. And this idea of working class people voting for Republicans as being against their interests has been a common refrain for many election cycles. So I'm wondering if you can explain, in your opinion, your perspective, the shift in the relationship between the working class and the Democrats and toward the Republicans.
Yeah, I mean, it's very shocking and painful to me. Democrats have become the party of college grads. Republicans have created this coalition between the 1% and the working class. And that just shows you how Republicans have understood several things: how to connect culturally with non-elites and speak to them in a language they find compelling. Now, who are the people who chiefly created this problem? The 1%, who they're in coalition with. I mean, either that's tragic or it's brilliant, and frankly, it's both. But Democrats, meanwhile, are channeling the priorities in the language of college grads. And if that's working for you, definitely continue it. It is not working for me.
And it's clearly not working for a lot of people. As Joan talked about, the Democratic Party abandoned policies that made it more likely for working people to survive. This made the power of the Republican rhetoric and the algorithms even more potent for people seeking dignity and a better way of life. And in this space, people found room to ask questions, sometimes with genuine curiosity, and sometimes to incite conflict, but seemingly with more acceptance for mistakes and communication missteps than on the left. That understandable need for acceptance is part of what drives people to seek community in all kinds of places. In the next episode, we explore one of them: the church. In these times, the line between church and state seems blurry at best, and Christian nationalism is rising at an alarming rate. We'll talk to folks who help us understand why it's happening, what class has to do with it, and how we turn the tide.
We have to understand that Christian nationalism is not about Christianity. It's about seeking wealth and power to dominate, but use Christianity to justify those ends.
That's coming up on Shifting Terrain. Shifting Terrain was executive produced by Amanda Cowper and myself, Rachel Rybaczuk. Audio mixing by Tobey Mack. Music by Blue Dot Sessions and Epidemic Sound. Thank you to our guests, Joan Williams, Colin Davis, and Reese Peck. You can find their social media handles and book titles in our show notes. A special thank you to eMedia and Jacqueline Sinney. And we'd love it if you'd rate, follow, and share the show.